I was going to say, that this idea of believing in oneself is very important if you're going to advance our diplomatic efforts in the future. We have two discussants who will look at the issues that we have discussed on the panel so far. Dr. Lisa Tross and Mr. Rajiv Ramlal. I'm hopeful that they're going to give us some very disruptive and critical comments on what we've discussed so far. Alisa.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you also for staying the course. I'd like to thank my colleague Andy Knight and the UNDP for inviting me here and for facilitating my visit. I'm going to take the liberty of being on this final panel to draw on a few of the observations of the past few days in my response. And as Andrew Cooper noted, putting diplomacy and disruptive thinking together seems almost like an oxymoron. But let me try to bring them into closer relation, or perhaps at the very least, to make the tension more explicit. I want to make 4 quick and very general points. I know it's been a long day, agreeing with my colleagues for the most part, but with a few caveats and perhaps a final comment that picks up on an overwhelming sentiment that seems to have come from the floor over the course of the last 3 days. Firstly, panelists this afternoon have made a pervasive case of the need to rethink or recalibrate diplomacy in the complex world we inhabit today. We have moved from an era defined by the Cold War in the 1960s, when most of the Anglophone Caribbean was going through the independence era, to the apparent triumph of free market fundamentalism by the end of the 1980s, although parts of Latin America give us, or I should make my stakes clear, give me hope for an otherwise future, and into what we could variously describe today as plural, networked, multidimensional, multiscalar, multipolar worlds. And while certainly there is the need to respond to this dynamism, I want to caution us that perhaps we need to think about balancing continuity and change in our response. And I was struck by UE Vice-Chancellor Beckel's presentation yesterday, where I think importantly he drew on historical philosophies of freedom in our region to regenerate future-oriented efforts in our own present. So, for example, the nature of exogenous shocks may certainly have shifted. Climate change crises, for instance, have raised new questions for small island developing states and low-lying countries like Guyana. But it is also true that the modern Caribbean has been defined by its constant relation to exogenous shocks as an open, vulnerable, externally driven space for the past 500 years. It is true, too, that we can find many past examples of supple thinking and diplomatic maneuvers. So Andy talked about thinking about punching above our weight. We could look to history to find several examples in which the Caribbean used our numbers to gain tactical advantage in the UN General Assembly, to taking leading roles in Bandung and the non-aligned movement, working to establish a bauxite producer association in the 1970s. The point I'm making is that we can draw on these past innovative, disruptive actions. And in fact, here I would differ slightly with Andrew Cooper's suggestion that we may have moved past the stage of establishing solidarity with the global South. I've had the advantage of reading the abstracts and some of the PowerPoint presentations. And while surely we do not face the same landscape, I would suggest that there remains enormous potential for the region to diversify its relations away from an overwhelming Eurocentric or North Atlantic focus. Earlier this afternoon, Joala Rambaran lightly admonished the audience to be more cognizant of harsh geopolitical realities facing small states in the Caribbean. But I would respond that there is also the danger of relapsing into a kind of fatalism that can lead to a neoliberal fait accompli, and that it is therefore crucial that we continually contest where this kind of thinking and logic might take us. One example I would point to would be to meaningfully pursue ALBA, the Bolivarian Alliance of the Americas, as a potential and genuine alternative to the deeply asymmetrical, neoliberal, and cynical economic partnership agreement that CARIFORUM signed with the European Union 7 years ago. My second point is that I agree with Jochen Prenti that strategic diplomacy is key. All I would do is translate this into the Caribbean context, as economist Lloyd Best has done, and ask us to think about strategic diplomacy as thinking and acting like a Nancy. Jamaicans have a saying, we small, but we talawa. So again, we should not reinvent the wheel, nor build edifices we cannot support. And I think Camille Allen made a superb and necessary argument about harnessing science, technology, and innovation to a new Caribbean diplomatic approach. And her presentation mentioned that thing she put in the time capsule, the hope that, by 2062, Trinidad and Tobago would develop a Caribbean space agency. Now, I'm not looking for instant gratification, but and I'm sad to say most of you will be dead by then, so you're quite right, we need to start thinking about this now. And the Belmopan-based Climate Change Center has indicated that developing countries can already access crucial technological outputs from space research. So an Anansi approach might have us explore and pursue strategic partnerships with relevant agencies like the European Space Agency, with an emphasis not just on acquiring technology, tools, and information, but, and this goes to a moving point made from the floor this morning by a young woman, asking the conference to move beyond glib invocations of youth. So far more crucially and excitingly, of equipping a generation of homegrown regional users who are actually properly trained in the application of space-based technologies that can be adapted in innovative and exciting ways to solve local problems and reinvigorate regional economies. My third point is that I agree with the observation of Obijiafor Aginam that traditional diplomacy based on interstate relations derives from a Westphalian notion of sovereignty that has really shifted in today's world. And he gave the example of health governance to talk about these different networks and the imperative to move beyond thinking and acting in silos. And here I will simply make mention, I know Andy has no voice, but maybe he can whisper or Matthew can talk about it more. I would like to make mention of the Diplomatic Academy that Professor Knight is involved in as a potential example, because it's too new to tell you that you've succeeded, of out-of-the-box thinking. Just the UE Today newspaper, for example, has a story in which the Diplomatic Academy is working to develop modules with the International Labour Organization